Good afternoon. Today we are going to look at imperatives, requests, and advise as reported speech. That is when somebody commands me or requests or advise something and I report or tell someone else that command, that request and that advice. Okay? But before we start, let's look at infinitives. So what is an infinitive? Okay, well, an infinitive is when you take to plus a verb and it functions like a noun. So, for example, I like to swim. Okay, here the noun to swim is the object of the verb like. So you can see how it functions as a noun, the infinitive. Okay, so that's important to know. Okay, let's get started now with a quick overview. Okay, so for request, commands, and advice, we need only to change the verb into the infinitive. So, for example, she said, sit in your chair. Well, I can change this as a reported speech. She commanded me to sit in my chair. Okay, then for request, mom said, please do your homework. Okay, well, I could change this, the verb do, into the infinitive, and I would say, mom asked me to do my homework. And lastly, for advice, for example, the direct speech would be dad said you should clean your room. Well, I can change clean to the infinitive to clean. So I would say dad advised me to clean my room. Okay, so that's a quick overview, and you can see why it's important to know what an infinitive is, because that's the biggest difference we're going to be looking at today. Biggest change between direct speech to indirect speech. Let's move on now and let's look at what happens when I want to negate the request, the command, and the advice. That means don't do something. So when we negate request, commands, and advice, we add not before the infinitive. So, for example, for imperatives, for commands, for example, she said, don't sit in my chair. Well, I would change don't sit to not to sit. Okay, let me give you an example. She commanded me not to sit in her chair. Next, for requests, mom, an example. Mom said, please don't play games. Okay, that's a request. Here, the verb is don't play. We can change don't play into not to play. So, for example, mom asked me not to play games. And then next is dad said, you might want to clean your room. This is advice. You might want to not clean your room, excuse me. You might want to not clean your room. I would change might want to not clean to advice. So it's not to clean. So, for example, dad advised me not to clean my room. Okay, so you can see now that was a quick overview. Let's look at each requests, advice, and demands one by one. So let's start by learning how to change reported request to indirect speech. So how to change direct speech request to indirect speech or reported request. So here the mom is saying to the boy, could you help me fold the clothes? Okay, so if I were writing a story, I would say, mom asked me, comma, quotation marks, could you help me fold these clothes? Question mark, quotation marks. Now let's change this to reported speech, okay? The way you would write for an academic journal or when you're speaking. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the comma, so the comma disappears. Second, we're going to remove the modal and the subject. So we're going to delete could and you. Next, we're going to remove the quotation marks, so no quotation marks, okay? Next, we're going to change the verb into the infinitive. We talked about this already, so instead of help, we're going to say to help. And also very important is if it's necessary, we need to change any human object or possessive pronoun. Here, me is not referring to me as an I, but here me is actually the mom. The mom is making the request, so you would change me to her. So now what do we have? Oh, lastly, the last change is we need to remove the question mark. So no question mark, okay? Because it is no longer question, direct question. It's an indirect question or recorded request. So what do we end up with? This is what we end up. This is our lovely reported speech request. Mom asked me to help her fold these. Okay. Now, it's important to note that the reporting verbs for Requests are, there's various. We have ask, request, and beg, and they usually have indirect objects. You can drop them sometimes. So, for example, mom asked me to help her help fold. She requested me to send her a copy. He begged her to give him another chance. Okay, so you can see right here: ask, request, beg. These are reporting verbs used for requests. Let's now talk about how to report advice. So let's start by changing direct speech advice to indirect speech. So here the doctor is telling her patient, you should walk every day. Okay, so I would directly report this in a story, in a narrative story. She advised me, comma, quotation, open quotation marks, you should walk every day, period, close quotation marks. Okay, so that's my direct speech. Let's change this to indirect speech. First, we're going to remove the comma. Okay, no comma. Next, we're going to remove the modal and the subject. So no you and no should. Next, we're going to remove the quotation marks. So we're going to remove those because we don't need them. It's not a story anymore. We're writing for a journal, for example. And next, we're going to change the verb into the infinitive. So walk, to walk. And that's it. So she advised me to walk every day. That is what we're left with. That's my reported speech advice. So if I'm reporting someone's advice to someone else, this is what I would say. She advised me to walk every day. The reporting verbs for advice are suggest, recommend, and advise, and they can have an object, indirect object. So for example, suggest. She suggested me to apply for this job. Recommend. She recommended me to send her a copy. And next example, advise plus object. He advised her to study biochemistry. Okay, now let's look at the imperatives. Before we move on, let's talk about what are imperatives. The imperative form is not very difficult. The only way to do it, we just don't include the subject in the sentence. So, for example, you sit down here. We wouldn't say that. We would delete you, and you say, sit down here. Now, it's a command. It's a demand. Okay? So, let's look at changing imperatives from direct speech to reported speech. And we're going to look at an example right here. Dad enters the room, opens the door, and says, clean your room. Okay? So, if I were to write a story, Dad told me, comma, open quotations, clean your room, period, close quotations. Let's change this to indirect or reported speech for the imperative commands. So, first we're going to remove the comma. Then we're going to remove the quotation marks. Next, we're going to change the verb into the infinitive, clean to clean. And if necessary, we need to change any pronouns. Here, this is not my room. Dad's saying your room, but he's talking to me. So I need to change your to my. So my room. All right. And that's it. Dad told me to clean my room. Okay. So let's look at the reporting verbs for imperatives and commands. So we have told plus the object, command, and demand. These are the reporting verbs we use for imperatives and commands. So for example, told, Dad told me to clean my room. Command, she commanded me to clean my room. And demand, the customer demanded me to bring him her water. Okay, let's do a quick summary. We can wrap this up. First thing we need to do is we're going to change the verb in the clause into the infinitive for demands, suggestions, and requests. We're going to use not before the infinitive, not to plus verb. Remember that not all reporting verbs have the same use, meaning, function. So the reporting verbs for advice are suggest, recommend, advise, beg. The reporting verbs for imperatives, for demands, are demand, command, tell. And the reporting verbs for request are ask, request, tell, and beg. Lastly, you need to put the person who is the object of the request, demand, or advice after the reporting verb. So, for example, told me plus the infinitive too. All right, that concludes this presentation. Thanks so much for watching. Please enjoy your day and have a nice day. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please email me. I look forward to seeing you in class.